altar that is in
That's right,
with this
kids.
inscription
It's once again
to an
time
unknown
for Comics
God.
in Christ.
So
and in
you
today's
are ignorant
episode,
of the very
we're once
thing
again
you worship.
taken over by the
And
Wrestler of
this
Faith podcast
is what
as
I
we look
am
at
going to
the
proclaim
respect
to
of
you.
history.
Our scripture comes from the book of Acts, chapter 17, verses 18 through 23. A group of philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him into a meeting where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean." Paul then stood in the meeting and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walk around and look carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar that is with this inscription, to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I am going to proclaim to you."
Welcome to the Wrestler Faith Audio Podcast. My name is Michael Davis, and we continue our journey today with the National Wrestling Alliance World Heavyweight Championship, and we're going to show its place in a very crucial moment in wrestling history. The scripture that you heard before this was the moment in the Apostle Paul's missionary life as he's standing on Mars Hill in this presence of believers, people who understood, who knew religion, who knew every faith practice and every movement that has gone through time. And the Apostle Paul looks over to the corner and says, "You have this one chair that's open, and it's for the God that you do not know. I am here to represent that person." Today, as we have the NWA title sitting in front of us, this isn't as much to build up the history of the National Wrestling Alliance, but for just a quick moment, praise the construction of what would become Extreme Championship Wrestling. One night at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, there was a tournament held to proclaim a new NWA World Heavyweight Champion. This was a time period after WCW had really taken over. World Championship Wrestling started to sever its connection with the National Wrestling Alliance. We know that this started some time ago when Ric Flair went to the WWF with the big gold belt. At that time was recognized by the National Wrestling Alliance as the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. And in that time period, Lex Luger pins Barry Windham to be proclaimed the first ever WCW World Heavyweight Champion. So that Southern Territory's identity shifts at that moment, and what was the proclaimed title of the NWA was set aside to set in a new regime that would be World Championship Wrestling. When Ric Flair's in the WWE, he comes in and he is recognized by the NWA as the real world's champion. And Flair spends his time in the WWF. He wins the WWF World Heavyweight title, and at that moment, the prestige that was the NWA title was set aside. So there was a one-night tournament in Philadelphia. And in the final round of that match, Shane Douglas, the Eastern Championship Wrestling World Heavyweight Champion, wrestled Too Cold Scorpio in the finals, and Shane Douglas wins the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, something that the board of directors of the NWA hoped would reboot what was the NWA World Title and get some more traction so that the 10 pounds of gold could return back to its place of prestige and importance. Well, that didn't quite happen. That didn't quite happen. On that night, unbeknownst to everyone except for two people, Paul E. Dangerously, currently known as Paul Heyman in WWE, the advisor of the WWE World Heavyweight Champion Roman Reigns, and Shane Douglas had a counter idea. Now, every time that I hear these actions of Shane Douglas within this moment, I think about the Apostle Paul in this Mars Hill conversation. There comes a moment as Shane Douglas moves forward to present the mission statement that would spark what we know and celebrate as Extreme Championship Wrestling. Shane Douglas moves into this conversation with acknowledging and praising the history. If you look at this Mars Hill scripture, that is exactly what the Apostle Paul does before he introduces the new path. He celebrates all the other chairs that are set at this altar. He celebrates and acknowledges the religious dedication of all the leaders who are there. He names the chair by chair and celebrates the leaders' knowledge of those things. And this night in which that Shane Douglas won the NWA World Heavyweight title, he praises the history. He takes a moment to look at the belt and praises the 10 pounds of gold's history within the existence of professional wrestling. He talks about Terry Funk. He talks about Jack Briscoe. He talks about Ricky Steamboat. He talks about Dusty Rhodes. He talks about Kerry Von Erich. He talks about Ric Flair. And Shane Douglas lays out the important history that the 10 pounds of gold represents. And then he turns and he picks up the ECW title, setting aside the NWA World Heavyweight title. And he proclaims, I am here to celebrate the new way. As he then holds up only the Eastern Championship Wrestling title and proclaims the beginning of Extreme Championship Wrestling. Only he and Paul Heyman knowing spark the revolution that would become ECW. The Apostle Paul does this as well. The Apostle Paul acknowledges the history, the faith history that exists in each of these altar chairs. And then he turns to that one chair, the chair that is set for the unknown God. And he says, I am here to tell you who that is. And I'm here to proclaim to you that's who I follow. The new way, the new path, the celebration of the one who has come to bring true restoration and true wholeness and true resurrection of spirit. The Apostle Paul, respectful to the history, proclaims the new way and is challenging everyone there to focus on the new path. Now, when we get into next week's episode of The Wrestler of Faith, we'll talk about how Shane Douglas may not have been as respectful as the Apostle Paul, but Shane Douglas still acknowledges the history of the 10 pounds of gold before showing the new way that would become the Extreme Championship Wrestling World Heavyweight title. The Apostle Paul proclaims respectfully the history that's acknowledged in each of these chairs around the altar, and then proclaims the new way. And I'll share with you another person that did that as well. Jesus Christ always respected the history of faith as he built his path towards the new way. If you look over the Passover event, as everyone was challenged to take their best sheep, their best lamb, their best of their crops and to paint the blood over their doorways so that death would pass over that house. Jesus Christ in his narrative refers to him as the sacrificial lamb. He uses and respects that history to proclaim his finality of his sacrifice. Jesus Christ continues to use that Passover history as he takes the Passover feast and begins to share with his disciples, all of those around him, how that he would be the one who would complete the promise, that he would be the one who brought fulfillment. And instead of disrespecting Passover, disrespecting the Passover feast, Jesus Christ used all of that imagery and respected that imagery to share with the greater world what he would do. As we look at all these things, I want you to see the importance of our history, see our importance of needing to respect our history, and seeing the importance of being willing to also express the challenge of moving in a new way and moving forward of doing new and exciting things. Faith history is so deeply ingrained in our identities, to disrespect it disrespects how that we have gotten to where we are in our current moment. To disrespect the history that has built up cultures, that has built up structures, has the potential in the future of disrespecting the history and the structure that Jesus Christ has created for us and has gotten us to this moment within our living. The more as we look at this history, and next week we're going to talk about how disrespectful Shane Douglas was, but Shane Douglas showed honor to the history before he presented his manifesto. The Apostle Paul showed and acknowledged and respected each chair at the altar before proclaiming the new way. As we deal with both being respectful to our history and being willing to transform and move forward into new futures, we are doing the hard work process of what it really means to touch souls, what it really means to touch spirits, and what it really means to bring someone into the light of newness that only comes through the grace of Jesus Christ, and then respectfully move forward to share that grace with so many others. Hold on to all those things as we look at how we look at our histories, look at our present, but more importantly, challenge and prepare for our futures so that the gospel message of Jesus Christ can transform lives. That's the Wrestler of Faith podcast for this week. My name is Michael Davis. Have a week.
This has been a presentation of DWO Podcasting.